One of the highlights of this year's Melbourne Documentary Film Festival is a film called Kombi Man, and it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the director of Kombi Man, Jeff Bird. Jeff, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thank you, Peter. It's great to have a chat with you.
This is such an interesting story about Paul Muddimer and his obsession with combi vans and so on. How did it all come about that you were able to make this film?
Well, it started a little bit pretty much over a coffee and and a bit of a laugh and actual Paul asking me about GoPros and whether I could help him with that so he could film a bit. And then we sort of looked at each other and thought, oh, that's a great idea for a film. But we never really thought, gee, how are we going to do it? And then we just started writing things up and we started filming a couple of scenes and it just grew and grew. And we got to the point where I suppose it was the point of no return and we had to finish it. But it took a long time because Paul was so ill that he could only film half a day every once a month or something like that. And so we couldn't have done it as a a standard film where you would shoot and get it all done in a certain amount of time. It just sort of evolved because of the situation, and then we just kept doing it. And to tell you the truth, there were quite a few times over the years where we thought, well, even I thought, oh, look, this is never going to get finished. And why are we doing this? But then Paul got so much out of it that I just kept going. He just loved doing it. He loved to get out of the house. He loved to do creative things, and he used to be so happy when he was doing it. And it was like, well, we just have to do it because he gets so much out of it. And it was a lot of fun because he was an incredibly fun guy. He's the bravest guy, most courageous person I've ever known. And I don't say that lightly, but he was seriously, seriously ill. And there was a point, as he says in the film, there was a point when it was at its worst, or part of the time it was at its worst, where he would roll over in bed and he would crack his ribs. And that's how sick he was. And so it was a monumental effort for him to get out of the house. The new treatments and the new drugs that he was on a special trial. He's one of the last people in Australia to get on a new therapy trial, which means he didn't have to pay for it. Otherwise, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that sort of gave him a second chance, and he really came good, and he could do things again, whereas before he couldn't. I mean, eventually he ran out of time, but it gave him a lot of quality time as well. And so, yeah, we just kept going, and he loved doing it. And look, most of the scenes in the film are his ideas. They say, well, what about this? And I'd say, oh yeah, well, maybe we can do that. We can jig it a bit to get it to fit, and we'd go and do it. And he had all these amazing contacts, and doors would just open for the guy. Like I would try. It was quite humiliating because I would try to get in somewhere and the door would be slammed in my face. No, you can't come in here, or you wouldn't get a phone call back. And Paul would just pick up the phone and they'd say, oh, okay, Paul Minimer. Oh, okay, he's welcome. So he was quite loved by so many people, and he helped so many people, in his role as a psychologist. And it was he opened a lot of doors. Yeah.
How interesting to hear that, and how supportive his wife was throughout, including the Great Ocean Road trip.
Yes, Maureen was amazing. And do you know what's interesting? Because the way the film turned out, that wasn't the way we envisaged it turning out, because he was supposed to take that drive and he was supposed to do that. But the day before we were going to do it, and we had everything planned, he got told, they discovered a deep vein thrombosis and said, you can't go. and he said, well, there's no way I'm going. And but he couldn't drive. He wasn't allowed. He had to keep his leg up and sit in the back. He wasn't allowed to drive. And if it wasn't for Maureen to step up and say, okay, well, I'll drive, it wouldn't have happened. And it's no mean feat to drive a Kombi. I don't know if you've ever driven a Kombi. I used to have a Beetle, and they're terrible to drive. And the Kombi I didn't dare drive. It was enough just sitting in it, the way it rattled. And Maureen had never driven it before. She'd never driven that Kombi. So to drive it for the first time on the Great Ocean Road, on those windy roads and those cliffs and everything, it took a lot of. It was a very gutsy thing to do, but she was absolutely determined to do it, because he wanted to do it. So, and it was interesting in terms of the story of the film. It was like we thought Paul would be the one driving all that, but what actually happens in the film is Maureen comes through as the the one that saved the day, and you realise at the end of the film, actually, this is a bit of a love story between these two, that you start to realise just how dedicated they are to each other, which is not something we'd actually thought about when we were doing it. It just sort of happened, which makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that really works very well in terms of the way the film concludes. Tell me about this obsession about VW combis, because I wasn't aware there was so many collectors and people interested. Plus, you found some great archival footage as well.
Yeah. Well, I've got to say, I don't totally get it myself. I don't think I want to see another Kombi again after filming them. But no, they're so loved, and it was quite amazing when Paul finally got his. He would be parked somewhere in the street or down the beach or whatever. People would just come up to him. People would just come up and start talking because of the Kombi. They just, I don't know, there's something about them that people really respond to. They look happy. I do think that they are a bit of a symbol for freedom and getting out on the road and just going. And I just think that's what they symbolise to people, and perhaps a simpler time and definitely simpler technology, that's for sure. I think that there's a whole subculture out there. We went to the VW show, and there was just hundreds of Kombis and all sorts of people. It's not just the baby boomers. It's young people as well are getting into it now. The only problem is they cost a lot of money, especially a good one. Like you're looking at probably 40, 50,000 for a decent one. And for a collector's item, you're looking at 100,000, more than $100,000. So, which is incredible, really, considering what they used to be. I remember when I was a kid that they were bombs. No one wanted them.
So, but certainly had a very distinctive look. And as I mentioned, you found some really good archival footage to demonstrate that.
It was very difficult to. Do you know what? It's very surprising. There's very little archival footage of Kombis out there. Yeah, it's very surprising. There's a lot of footage of Beetles, a lot of Beetle footage, but not much of Kombi footage. I don't know why. Maybe it's really because back then, in the 70s, 60s, 70s, even the 80s, no one really thought that. They were workhorses. They were vans. That people took and drove in the desert. They drove them on beaches. They drove them, across Africa. They weren't seen as anything special. So I don't think people felt the need to film them. Whereas I think the Beetle was, there were more of them, and they looked more distinctive in a way. So there wasn't that much footage out there, and we had to pay for some of it, quite a bit of it. So, that was a cost on the production, to license a lot of that. But yeah, it was a bit of a challenge to find good footage. And that footage that you're probably referring to is pretty much the best there is.
That
Yeah.
is so interesting. And as you say, you had to pay for that. So did you have much production support, etc., behind you, cameras, all that sort of thing?
Pretty much none whatsoever.
Mm.
So we didn't have any traditional funding. We didn't have anything from broadcasters or funding bodies or anything like that. Really, really up until the end, the Great Ocean Road trip, we didn't have any. I'm just trying to think now. We really didn't have any funding at all. We were just paying for it ourselves, and doing that, and just using our own equipment and borrowed equipment and friends and things like that. And then towards the end, the RACV came in, and they basically, their sponsorship paid for the Great Ocean Road, that whole component. And obviously people were working for free, and we were able to pay for the equipment and all the things that we had to do. It's very tricky to film on the Great Ocean Road. I wouldn't recommend it. You know, all the planning and the permits you have to get to be able to do that sort of thing. It took months and months and months. So, and that costs money as well. But really, if it weren't for the RACV coming in with that sponsorship at the end, we wouldn't have been able to do that. We just wouldn't be able to afford to do it. And then all through, you know, once we'd filmed it, then we needed money to edit it. And then we needed money to do the post-production and the sound and the music. So at each point, things stopped, and then we tried to raise the money. And just as always with this project, you know, Paul used to always say, and Mark, you know, the universe will deliver. And I used to just laugh and say, oh, well, I don't know about that. And then just at the last minute, 1 minute to midnight, someone would pop up and say, well, I'll give you the money to finish that next part. And a lot of that was family and friends. And a few organisations jumped in, a few charities jumped in and helped out, and we got it finished.
Well, congratulations on that. And I must say the music is really interesting. I liked the way you integrated that into the film.
Well, that's the work of two great musicians in New South Wales, John Roy and Kim Humphries. Did that. They wrote that completely, that score for this, and they're fantastic musicians. Kim Humphries quite well known in New South Wales as to play in a lot of bands, you know, going back, and does quite a bit of surf music. And John's a fantastic composer as well, and he did the sound mix. So we're really lucky with that. I think they did a great job, you know, because that was a big concern as we were working through the post, that, you know, we couldn't really afford some, you know, signature music. You know, we couldn't afford, you know, very well-known bands, and so they were able to do that, and I think what they did was better than what we could have got, even if we had to pay for it, you know, a lot of money. I think they did a great job.
They did. I endorse that. It sounded great. So you've mentioned the editing. Tell me about your editing process in terms of deciding what remained in the final version of the film, etc.
Well, the editor, I don't know if you're familiar with Bill Murphy, who's one of the best editors around. He Romper Stomper fame. Yeah, he's done hundreds of films, probably more than that. and he's a veteran editor. He's just like he's like a machine. You just give him the footage and off he goes. And so I had trouble keeping up with him, because I was feeding him footage, you know, as we were going, and he'd keep asking for it. It's like, oh, gee, you can slow down a bit. But he was fantastic, and when you that's you know, look, we had funding for that, for Bill, and that was money well spent, because when you get a good editor, that just it's just worth gold to have a good editor to work through, especially a project like this, which was so many different stories and so many different scenes, and we had to weave a web, you know, a theme through so that it held together. And we did have to take some good scenes out, which is always painful. But and we may turn some of that into bonus material, but it was just some of the scenes we had to take out were just getting in the way of the narrative at the end. So you know, that's just part of the process that you have to go through.
Of course, always. And I found so interesting. I mean, there are aspects to the film like the Buddhism that he explores, and other sort of spiritual aspects, which I found really interesting part of the film.
Yeah, it's a little bit out there, you know. It's a bit, it's certainly you know, off the track a bit, the beaten track a bit, but and I hope it works. I hope it holds together. But that's what Paul wanted. That's what he was interested in, and I've got to say I was interested in that as well. You know, it was fascinating to go along, and those contacts are Paul's contacts, that to go to those sorts of places, and to sit down, like I found that conversation with the head monk at the Buddhist monastery. I found that fascinating. You know, just to sit, there's quite a bit more than that that's not in the film. It's a fascinating conversation. And I remember Bill, the editor, looking at that whole conversation and turning to me once saying, "This is really profound, a lot of this, what this guy is saying." And it was, you know, because I don't have any affiliation with any of those movements or anything, but I found it fascinating to hear that. And Paul was really kind of floating through, you know, he was really not particularly attached to any one belief system or anything like that. He was just exploring and finding out, and you know, talking to people, which was classic Paul. Paul would talk to anyone. So, you know, people just come up to him and talk to him, you know. And yeah, I think it's fascinating, and I think what Paul hoped and what I hope is that, you know, there are a lot of people out there, you know, a lot of people who going through tough times, or have a serious illness, or have these sorts of issues, and don't know where to turn, and you know, just the possibility that, hey, there's these things are happening out there, and you know, perhaps you can go on your own journey, whatever that is. You know, I think that's part of the film. So,
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely the journey, very interesting one indeed. Was Paul able to see any parts of the film, and also how did his wife react?
To the finished film, or
Yes, yes.
I think I think the whole family really love it and love the film, and I think they were quite surprised, to tell you the truth, that you know, oh, this is not too bad, you know, that we actually did pull something together, and so they're quite moved. It's quite emotional, of course, for them. You know, incredibly difficult for them, you know, to actually, I actually don't know how they do it, you know, because they were very close, to actually you know, see that again and again. That's yeah, it's not easy, I don't think, but I do think that they're proud of it, and also because they're proud of Paul for what he did. You know, it wasn't. I think that's what's unique about it, is that it's not a film. It's not a film about, you know, a filmmaker making a film about someone. It's actually Paul making a film with me. We're doing it together, and so it's his film as well. And I think that's what's really different about it, and that's what I like about it. You know, it's his creativity as well, and he has his own agency in the whole process, which I really love. I like that kind of filmmaking where you make something as a partnership with someone who's in front of the camera, not about them, not as if you're, you know, observing them and everything. You're actually making it with them. I think that's an interesting way of making films. And what was your previous question? Oh, did Paul see anything of it? He didn't see the finished film.
Yeah.
He didn't see it cut together. He saw every scene assembled. So after we would film, because we had so much time between filming, I would assemble all the usable material together into a sequence, and it might be like half an hour long. and he would watch that, and so he was such a clever guy. He was so creative. He imagined what it was going to look like. You know, he never made a film before, but you know, he would just say, "Oh, look, I don't think we need that scene." And he would say that way in at the beginning, and I'd say, "Oh, let's just wait. I think we might." And then we get to the edit, and yep, that scene's gone. So it was pretty good
Yeah.
at predicting that. So, but it's like that's my greatest disappointment, is that he didn't get to see the final version, and it would have been just amazing to share that with him.
Yes.
And that's what I looked forward to through it all, is how great this is going to be to share this last end process with him. But unfortunately, he didn't make it. He didn't make it. So, but he wanted it finished. He spoke to me on the phone a couple of days, a day or two before he passed away, and he made me promise this will get finished, and he wanted it out there. So, and the reason for that is he wanted to help other people. He wanted other people going through similar situation to know that there are others who've done that, and there are other ways of looking at things, and he wanted to share that.
I absolutely understand that, and yes, the film works so well, and so the film Kombi Man will be screening at the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival in July, which is great. Will the film be screened anywhere else?
I don't know. Nothing planned. I hope so. This is the first screening. This is the world premiere. So it hasn't screened anywhere else. And we've entered into festivals and things like that. So, see what happens.
Oh, well, I'm sure it will be well received at MDFF, which is an excellent film festival. So, Jeff, are you already planning another film?
I'm in recovery mode. So I don't have anything planned at the moment. I'm looking forward to taking it easy for a while. It's actually an interesting question, because when you try to make a film without proper funding, it's an enormous amount of work, and it's relentless as well. So especially when you're doing so much of it yourself, and you don't have those supports in place, so you get very tired doing it. It's enjoyable, but you get to the end and you sort of just fall in a heap and go, "Wow, I don't know if I'm up for that again." And I think that's true of a lot of filmmaking. It takes so much out of you. It's such a you give so much of yourself and so much of your time and all of that it's an extraordinary process, really.
It definitely is. I speak to so many filmmakers, and it certainly is quite a process, especially documentaries that take a while to be able to complete.
Well, that's right, because documentaries, you don't have as much control. You don't. It's interesting, because people, I kind of get the feeling people think, "Oh, documentary must be easier than drama," but it's not. Drama, you have a script in place, you have a storyboard in place, you have a whole lot of support networks in place to do this, and you go out and shoot it in a certain amount of time, whether that's 5 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever it is, and it's done. And then it moves into the next process. But a documentary, because you don't have control and you can't control what's happening, because you're dealing with actuality and lots of different people and situations, it just makes an incredibly complex process. And you go out and film something and it doesn't work, or it wasn't what you expected. And then that means you've got to go back and think about, well, how are we going to approach this and do it a different way. But yeah.
Yep, I absolutely endorse that. So congratulations on getting the film to this stage, that it's now available and will be screened at the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival. We've been speaking to Jeff Bird, who's the director of Kombi Man, screening at MDFF in July. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for your interest. Fantastic.
Okay. All the best then. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.